So, Victor, I wanted to look at it since you and Jack talked a little bit about Fauci. I know that there's been a lot of news out about the origins of the virus. He says in his diary, the situation with my national and international fame is explosive and really unimaginable. It is not hyperbole to say that today I am the most famous and talked about person in the country and one of the most recognizable people in the world. Countless profiles on me in multiple media. I cannot even read all the things that are written about me since I'm so busy. Seriously, POTUS seems to be enamored of me even though I'm taking the spotlight away from him. We are developing a very unique and interesting relationship. The entire Secret Service Corps is coming over to me and chatting. They let me into the first gate without even checking ID. Everyone is worried about my health and welfare, probably because it's all over the place that I am almost 80 years old. And I'm reading that like a little kid because that 80-year-old sounds like a little kid here, Victor. So,
Uh, he's an academic of sorts. I mean, he left medical school and he wasn't really a practicing doctor. He went right into the bureaucracy and he worked his way up. And then he turned what was somewhat an obscure agency at the time, the Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, because I mean, we we do have the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, disease, and we have the FDA and we have the National Institute of Health. But somehow, because he was there 40 years, he built an industry and he got all of this power, but he had all this power within kind of a closet community. So when he got out, he got a little bit of fame during the AIDS crisis when he was in his 40s, and that was a narcotic that addicted him to it. So then when the influenza came out in 2013, he had in those diaries, there's mention that he feels shorted, that he doesn't get enough airtime. So this was his big bonanza. And the problem he has is not just that he was wrong. I mean, he said masks have no utility, but you can then later, you have to wear a mask. And then two is better. And then he said, if you get the double sequence, Moderna, Pfizer, you will not be infectious and you will not be infected. It's that simple. It's that clear. And then 4 months later, after his vaccination, he not only got infected, but he hid that he had a pulmonary or, infarction. And so he had an embolism, basically. And that was a recognized side effect in some elderly patients that had the vaccination. But the biggest problem he's having is he went to Congress and he went into the public domain. He said things. So you mentioned he went after Jay Bhattacharya and he went after Martin Kuhlendorf and he went after Scott and Gupta, the doctor from Oxford, and he went after Scott Atlas. So why did he go after them? He went after them because he called them the Three Stooges, and then he called Atlas. He actually called up the woman, Alicia Griffith, that's working in The View. He called her up, or she called him up. It's unclear who called first to fire Scott Atlas. She was working for the Trump administration. So they hated Scott Atlas because he was not impressed by Fauci or Deborah Birx. And so he kept bringing in I've known Scott for 20 years. He just kept bringing in data and data and data and said, here's a study, here's a study, here's a study, here's a study. If you shut down the schools, you will lose years of education at this key moment. If you put people and stuff them into houses and apartments, expect higher suicide, familial abuse, substance abuse. If you do this, expect alcoholism. If you do this, expect when you let them out, they're going to go crazy. And he went on, and you will destroy livelihoods. You will destroy small businesses. You'll bankrupt the country. And people will not go to the doctor to get PSA tests, breast exams, you name it, and the cancer and death rate will go up. And then he said, most radically, go ahead and get the vaccinations. We think that might have some utility, but it doesn't stop the virus. They got very angry at that. And then who's they? Burks um, and Fauci and Francis Collins. And then in addition to that, uh, Atlas, Baccharia, and Kohlendorf and Gupta were also saying that when you let people out, they're going to go crazy. And that's what happened with George Floyd. That 4 months, everybody was cooped up. And he said it's unenforceable anyway. And he was proven to be a Nostradamus. And Fauci was pictured at a baseball game with his mask down, and he said you had to wear it everywhere. And then we had, of course, Pelosi at her hairdresser, and Gavin down with athletes in LA, and the French Laundry with lobbyists. And we had Fauci himself admitting that he was going to dinner festivities at Jake Tapper's house. This is a time when people could not go to Christmas. They could not go to Thanksgiving. They could not, that was against the law. And so he says all of these things in the public domain, and he said them under oath. And then we realize that all the time he was communicating with the opposite narrative. So he said, this, he says to France, he goes into panic mode when he hears about the Wuhan virus because he knows he had a hand in Wuhan. So then he gets experts together, 12. 10 of them tell him the sequence is impossible in nature. It didn't jump from a dead pangolin in a wet market. It didn't go from a bat 100 miles away. There's no evidence of animal to person transmission. It came from that lab. And then he admitted that that was the consensus. And then he went out in the public sphere and said just the opposite. And why did he say just the opposite? He said just the opposite because he had a hand in green lighting gain of function research in China by allowing and encouraging U.S. scientists to communicate with Chinese researchers, to go over to China, to send critical instrumentation and know-how to China, and to give money through Peter Daszak, his Echo Health buddy. So he was saying one thing and doing the other. And what he was doing was illegal. It was barred in the United States. So the question now is his reputation is ruined. He was also two things that people didn't like. He was a pathological narcissist. All he did is talk. People were dying at the rate of 9,000 a day some days, and he's in there writing about whether he has a bobblehead toy and how neat it is, and he's going to be on all the network news. He's the most famous person in the world. He thinks he's bragging that he is edging Scott out. He meets with Scott Atlas, and he says to him, "You're probably right about the schools. There's no evidence that you can stop the spread by shutting, and you're right that the damage outweighs the benefits." And then he also says, "Yeah, you never really said, as was quoted, let it rip, herd immunity." And then he goes out and says just the opposite and trashes Scott Atlas. And so then he had Trump's ear because Trump thought he was the most popular man in America and all the media loved him. So if he treated him well, and then Fauci basically took over all of COVID policy. This little bureaucrat from one obscure agency suddenly was running the United States with Deborah Birx, who nobody ever heard of, and people who had long careers in public health policy, like Scott Atlas and Jay Bhattacharya. They were demonized. They say, well, Scott's a radiologist. He's not. Well, no, he's been studying and writing hundreds of articles on public health policy. He wrote the definitive book on the MRI and the brain. It's a huge, God, it weighs 10 pounds. And then uh, Jay, they said, well, he didn't get his medical license. Well, he has a PhD and a MD degree. So they were desperate because they knew they were wrong. They were mean and spiteful. And he used one of the methodologies that come across in this vast trove is that he had his hands on billions of dollars of grants to academic institutions. Everybody knew him. So his fame was to go to conferences. There's Anthony Fauci. I just saw him walk by. This is the annual meeting of thoracic surgery. This is the annual meeting of virology. There he is. And I have a grant up to him. I have a grant for $7 million for my lab at Stanford, Duke, Vanderbilt, whatever. I'm going to go talk to him. Hi, Dr. Fauci. You are so brilliant on TV. Well, yes, I am. Well, And that's how he well, everybody was scared. So if you said, "Dr. Fauci, I just wanna tell you that, uh, you were wrong about the Wuhan lab. It's demonstrably untrue that it came from," then he would go back and call they knew he would go back and call, "Who's that blank blank that confronted me? I don't wanna give him a grant." So he was using our money to punish and reward people based on their fealty to him. And that's all gonna come out, and the question is, will he say things that are demonstrably untrue or contradict things he said in the past on Wednesday when he's under oath? Because that blanket pardon is for everything up until the pardon. It's not a future pardon that if anything he does, you know. And I have a feeling that he will do a James Comey. 245 times before the House Oversight Committee, James Comey, I don't know. I can't remember. That was not in my purview. He just flat out lied. Or he will say, I'm going to take the Fifth Amendment.
Yeah.
He's 85. What are they going to do to him? By the time they indict him, it would take years. But he's suffering now. And then the worst thing, he was conniving to get all these awards. He knew all the people in the different award committee. He's angling to get $1 million award from Israel. He's angry that the ethics people think that maybe he's using his platform as public trust to leverage it for money. So he has to get permission. And he's got all these awards. He's made millions of dollars. His wife had a high salary. They just raked it in. He comes across as really grasping and greedy and narcissistic and self-centered, and doesn't in his diary, he doesn't have any main discussions about the issues or the moral problems or anything. He comes off as heartless. When he said, "I remain the science," he discredits science.